Picture this. A cowboy walks up to the side of a barn, closes his eyes, and empties his revolver. Bullets flying everywhere like popcorn in a microwave. Then, in a stroke of genius that would make any politician proud, he strolls over, draws a bullseye around the tightest cluster of bullet holes, and declares himself a sharpshooter. "Look at that grouping," he boasts. "I never miss." Welcome to the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, where we're all secretly terrible cowboys pretending we knew where we were aiming all along. This sneaky little cognitive trick happens when we cherry-pick data clusters from random information and then act like we've discovered something profound. It's like looking at clouds and insisting that one definitely looks like your ex's new partner. Sure, if you squint hard enough and tilt your head at just the right angle. The fallacy gets its name from our imaginary Texan marksman, but it shows up everywhere in real life. Remember when your conspiracy theorist uncle connected random events to prove his theory about birds being government drones? That's our sharpshooter at work. Or when someone notices that every time they wash their car, it rains. Obviously, they've discovered the secret to ending droughts. Scientists call this data dredging or p-hacking, when researchers dig through mountains of data until they find something, anything, that looks significant. It's like dumping out 1,000 puzzle pieces from different boxes and celebrating when you find 3 that sort of fit together. The human brain is essentially a pattern-seeking missile. We're hardwired to find connections even where none exist. It's why we see faces in toast, hear hidden messages in songs played backward, and convince ourselves that wearing our lucky socks actually affects the outcome of sports games. The antidote? Always ask, did you predict this pattern before looking at the data, or did you notice it afterward? If it's the latter, you might just be drawing targets around bullet holes. Real sharpshooters call their shots before they pull the trigger, not after checking where the bullets landed. So next time someone shows you an amazing pattern they've discovered, remember our Texas cowboy. Sometimes a cluster is just a cluster, and correlation is just correlation, wearing a fake moustache, pretending to be causation. No true Scotsman fallacy. A colleague confidently announces at lunch, "People from my hometown are the friendliest folks you'll ever meet. We always help strangers in need." When someone mentions that viral video of a woman from that exact town screaming at tourists for asking directions, your colleague doesn't even blink. Oh, she must be a transplant or raised wrong. No real native would act that way. And there it is, the no true Scotsman fallacy, performing its magic trick of making counterexamples disappear through the power of creative redefinition. This slippery logical error earned its name from philosopher Antony Flou's example about a prideful Scotsman claiming no Scotsman would commit a particular heinous crime. When confronted with newspaper evidence of a Scotsman doing exactly that, our friend doesn't reconsider his statement. Instead, he performs mental gymnastics that would win Olympic gold. Well, no true Scotsman would do such a thing. It's a masterclass in intellectual dishonesty, whether intentional or not. The goalpost doesn't just move, it grows legs and runs away entirely. The original claim morphs into something unfalsifiable because any inconvenient counterexample gets dismissed as not counting. Watch this fallacy proliferate in every sphere of human argument. Real men don't cry. Until you point out that Navy SEALs, UFC fighters, and action heroes have all shed tears publicly. Then suddenly it becomes real men don't cry about trivial things, or without good reason. The definition keeps shape-shifting like an argumentative amoeba. In online fandoms, it's practically an art form. True Star Wars fans hate the prequels, point out millions who love them. They're not real fans. who understand Lucas's original vision. The purity test keeps getting refined until the true group shrinks to match whoever agrees with the speaker. Political discussions are fertile ground for this fallacy. Genuine patriots support this policy. Well, what about these decorated veterans who oppose it? They've lost sight of what true patriotism means. The definition becomes so narrow that it's just a mirror reflecting the speaker's own beliefs. The tragedy is that this fallacy prevents real discussion. Instead of examining whether our generalizations hold up, we just excommunicate any evidence that challenges them from our definition. So when someone starts sentences with "no true insert group here would ever," watch out. You're probably about to witness some world-class definitional gymnastics that would make even a contortionist wince. Gish-Gallop fallacy. You're watching a debate on renewable energy when one speaker suddenly goes into overdrive. Wind turbines kill birds. Solar panels contain toxic materials. Germany's energy program failed. Renewable energy caused Texas blackouts. Lithium mining destroys ecosystems. Electric car batteries can't be recycled. Wind farms cause cancer. Solar doesn't work at night. Renewables need fossil fuel backup. Green energy costs jobs. Wind turbines are noisy. Solar panels don't work in winter. Your head spins. Each claim sounds specific enough to be credible, but before anyone can fact-check the first one, 12 more have piled on top. You've just witnessed a gish gallop, the debate tactic equivalent of a denial of service attack on your brain. This overwhelming technique takes its name from Duane Gish, a creationist debater who discovered that you could win debates not through superior arguments, but through sheer volume. It's the machine gun approach to argumentation. Spray enough bullets and something's bound to hit, right? The brilliance and evil of the Gish Gallop lies in exploiting the asymmetry of bullshit. Making a false claim takes 5 seconds. Properly refuting it might take 5 minutes. When someone drops 20 false claims in a minute, they've created nearly 2 hours of cleanup work. It's like someone dumping a truckload of ping pong balls on your lawn and declaring victory when you can't pick them all up in 30 seconds. Social media has turned the Gish Gallop into an Olympic sport. Twitter threads, Facebook posts, and comment sections become firing ranges, where gallopers paste walls of unsourced claims, suspicious statistics, and half-truths. By the time you've researched and responded to point 1, the conversation has moved on, and observers assume your silence on the other 19 points means you can't refute them. The galloper often doesn't even believe all their arguments. They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. It's quantity over quality, the spray and pray of rhetoric. They know that audiences often mistake confidence and volume for competence and veracity. Professional gallopers have memorized lists of talking points for every topic. Climate change? They've got 50 rehearsed objections. Evolution? Here come 40 recycled creationist claims. Vaccines? Prepare for an avalanche of misinterpreted studies and anecdotes. The most insidious part, even when every single point gets debunked, the sheer volume creates an impression that there's controversy or questions remain. It's not about winning with logic. It's about exhausting opposition and confusing audiences into thinking complexity equals validity. Kafka, trap, fallacy. A co-worker pulls you aside. I think you have unconscious biases against our new team members. You respond honestly that you don't believe you do and that you've tried to be welcoming. Their reply? The fact that you're denying it so strongly just proves how deep your biases run. Someone without biases would admit to having them. Wait, what? You've just been caught in a Kafka trap, the logical equivalent of quicksand. The more you struggle against it, the deeper you sink. Named after Franz Kafka's The Trial, where the protagonist is accused of an unspecified crime, and his protests of innocence are taken as evidence of guilt. This fallacy creates an inescapable accusation. It's a heads I win, tails you lose proposition, where denial becomes confirmation. The Kafka trap is devastatingly effective because it exploits our understanding that guilty people often deny guilt. But it commits the logical error of assuming that because guilty people deny guilt, anyone who denies guilt must be guilty. It's like saying, because all dogs have 4 legs, everything with 4 legs must be a dog. Sorry, tables, you're dogs now. This trap appears in various flavors. You're in denial about your addiction, and denial is the first sign of addiction. Or the classic, only someone with something to hide would refuse to let us search their house. The academic version, your failure to see your privilege is exactly what someone with privilege would say. Each version makes innocence impossible to establish. The trap becomes particularly vicious in social dynamics. Someone accused of being manipulative can't defend themselves without being told, see, a manipulative person would say exactly that. It's the argumentative equivalent of the Salem witch trials. If you float, you're a witch. If you drown, well, at least you were innocent. Therapists and self-help gurus sometimes unknowingly employ this. Resistance to the idea that you have trauma is itself evidence of trauma. While psychological resistance is real, making all denial into proof creates an unfalsifiable claim that no amount of self-knowledge can refute. The Kafka trap weaponizes good intentions. Most people want to be open to self-improvement and acknowledge their flaws. The trap exploits this by making self-doubt mandatory and confidence suspicious. It turns healthy skepticism into evidence of moral failure. Remember, a real discussion allows for the possibility that the accusation might be wrong. If denying something becomes proof of that very thing, you're not in a conversation, you're in a trap. And the only winning move might be not to play. Motter and Bailey fallacy. Your friend declares at a dinner party, corporations are destroying the planet and should be abolished entirely. When you question this extreme stance, they immediately pivot. I'm just saying, businesses need more environmental regulations. Don't you agree with that? Later, when talking to more sympathetic listeners, they're right back to advocating for the complete dismantling of capitalism. Welcome to the Motter and Bailey fallacy, argumentation's slipperiest bait-and-switch tactic. This fallacy takes its name from medieval castle design. The Motter was a defensive fortress built on raised ground, difficult to attack but not very comfortable for everyday living. The Bailey was the surrounding village where people actually conducted daily business. When enemies attacked, villagers would abandon the Bailey and retreat to the safety of the motte until the danger passed. In arguments, the Bailey is an attractive but easily attacked position, often extreme, controversial, or difficult to defend. The motte is a more modest position that's much easier to defend. The tactical genius of this fallacy is in the seamless switching between these positions while pretending they're identical. It works like this. Someone makes a dramatic, attention-grabbing claim, the Bailey. When challenged, they immediately retreat to a much more reasonable position, the motte, that's hard to dispute. Once the challenger is satisfied or exhausted, they saunter right back to their original extreme position. You'll spot this in politics constantly. A pundit claims, feminism aims to make women superior to men. Bailey. When challenged, they retreat. Feminism is just about equal rights for women. Who could disagree with that? Motte. The moment criticism fades, They're back to claiming feminism is about female supremacy. The same pattern appears across ideologies. All taxation is theft becomes, I just think taxes could be lower. Modern medicine is a conspiracy transforms into, I think we should question pharmaceutical companies sometimes. The rhetorical retreat happens so smoothly that many don't notice the position has fundamentally changed. What makes this fallacy particularly effective is that the motto position is often something reasonable that most people would agree with. The defender appears moderate and sensible when challenged, making critics seem like they're overreacting to a perfectly reasonable stance. The next time someone dramatically softens their position under scrutiny only to revert when the coast is clear, you're not witnessing flexibility. You're watching strategic retreat in action. Sea lioning fallacy. You post a casual comment online. I enjoyed that new superhero movie. Suddenly, a stranger appears. Interesting. Could you explain precisely why you enjoyed it? I'm genuinely curious. You provide a brief answer. They respond. That's not very specific. Do you have evidence that the cinematography was actually good? Any peer-reviewed articles on this film's quality? I'm simply asking for clarification. 20 increasingly exhausting messages later, they're still politely demanding citations for your personal movie opinion, while insisting they're just trying to have a civil discussion. Congratulations, you've been sea lioned. Sea lioning is the art of harassment disguised as civil inquiry. It involves bombarding someone with endless questions and demands for evidence, all while maintaining a veneer of politeness and reasonable curiosity. The salioner never acknowledges satisfactory answers, instead continually moving the conversational goalposts while exhausting their target. This fallacy gets its peculiar name from a 2014 Wondermark comic featuring a sea lion that relentlessly follows a couple around, demanding they justify an offhand comment about not liking sea lions. The persistent marine mammal insists it's simply being polite and reasonable, while clearly violating all social boundaries. What makes sea lioning especially devious is its exploitation of social norms around civility. The sealioner weaponizes etiquette, knowing that responding rudely to polite questions makes you look like the unreasonable one. They drain your energy through persistent questioning, while positioning themselves as the rational party, just seeking truth. It flourishes in public forums, where the salioner has an audience. The performative reasonableness isn't actually aimed at you. It's for spectators who might not recognize the pattern. To casual observers, the sealioner appears to be the patient, logical one, requesting simple information from someone increasingly frustrated. You'll spot sealioning in political discussions. I'm just asking why you believe in climate change. Please provide specific evidence for each point. Identity debates. I'm curious why you think discrimination exists. Could you document each instance? And any topic where someone can feign ignorance while demanding exhaustive proof. The sealioner's questions aren't genuine. They're performative. Real curiosity involves listening to answers and moving conversations forward. Sea lioning is about dragging them down into an exhausting spiral of demands that can never be satisfied. Next time someone's just asking questions with relentless persistence while ignoring your answers, remember, you're not obligated to feed the sea lion. Moving the goalposts fallacy. Your teenager promised to clean their room. You check later, clothes are put away, floor is vacuumed, surfaces dusted. Great job, you say. They beam with pride until you add, but you didn't organize your bookshelf alphabetically. When they do that too, you notice the closet isn't color-coded. After they tackle that, what about under the bed? No matter what they accomplish, there's always one more requirement they didn't know about. Eventually, they throw up their hands in frustration, and you declare they've failed to clean their room properly. This is moving the goalposts, the argumentative equivalent of Lucy yanking the football away just as Charlie Brown attempts to kick it again and again, also known as raising the bar or shifting the standards. This fallacy occurs when someone continually changes the criteria for success after the original conditions have been met. It transforms arguments into impossible marathons, where the finish line teleports further away each time you approach it. In science debates, it appears when skeptics demand evidence, then reject each study as insufficient when provided. Show me peer-reviewed research provided. That sample size is too small. Larger study provided. Those researchers are biased. Independent study provided. That journal isn't prestigious enough. The demands never end because the goal isn't actually to be convinced. It's to never concede. Politics thrives on goalpost relocation. A candidate proposes a policy with specific targets. When those targets are reached, critics immediately find new, never-before-mentioned benchmarks. Yes, unemployment dropped to 4%, but what about underemployment? The game continues with each achievement dismissed as inadequate against constantly evolving standards. Relationships suffer particularly from this fallacy. "I'll be happy when you earn more money" transforms into "now we need a bigger house," then "now we need a vacation home." Each achievement becomes merely a stepping stone to the next unspoken demand. What makes this fallacy so insidious is that legitimate evaluation often does require multiple criteria. The trick lies in distinguishing between predetermined standards versus ad hoc requirements invented after initial conditions are satisfied. Moving the goalposts reveals an uncomfortable truth. Some arguments aren't about reaching conclusions, but about maintaining them regardless of evidence. When success criteria evolve faster than anyone could possibly meet them, you're not facing a fair challenge. You're running on an infinite treadmill designed to exhaust without progress. Nirvana Fallacy. Your roommate refuses to use any cleaning products because they all contain chemicals that might be harmful. You suggest an eco-friendly brand tested for safety, but it still might have unknown long-term effects, they counter. You mention vinegar and baking soda. Natural doesn't mean completely safe, they argue. Frustrated, you ask what they would recommend. "I'm waiting for something that's 100% guaranteed to be harmless to humans and the environment," they explain, while the bathroom mold colony evolves into a sentient civilization. Welcome to the Nirvana Fallacy, where perfect solutions battle real ones, and perfect always wins, even as reality crumbles around us. Also known as the perfect solution fallacy, this error in reasoning rejects practical solutions because they fail to meet an impossible standard of perfection. It's like refusing to wear a raincoat because you might still get a few drops of water on your socks, so why bother at all? The fallacy thrives in policy debates. We shouldn't implement this anti-poverty program because it won't eliminate all poverty. This safety regulation isn't worth it because accidents will still happen. Why bother with partial climate solutions when they won't solve everything? Each argument sounds reasonable until you realize the alternative is doing absolutely nothing. Medical decisions become paralyzed by this thinking. This treatment is only 90% effective with some side effects, so I'll wait for something perfect. Meanwhile, the condition worsens while chasing an imaginary flawless cure. The Nirvana Fallacy pairs beautifully with its close cousin, the false dilemma. Together, they create a two-step death blow to practical action. First, frame the choice as either perfect solution or no solution, then reject anything imperfect. This eliminates the entire spectrum of good but imperfect options where actual progress lives. What makes this fallacy particularly deceptive is how reasonable it sounds. Who doesn't want ideal solutions? The poison lies in using theoretical perfection to sabotage achievable improvements. It's intellectual sabotage disguised as high standards. Watch for telltale phrases. Until we can guarantee 100% safety, unless it solves the entire problem, it's not worth doing unless it completely eliminates. These signals usually precede the rejection of workable ideas in favor of inaction cloaked as principle. The Nirvana fallacy doesn't just make perfect the enemy of good, it makes perfect the assassin of anything remotely helpful. The irony? Those who most vigorously employ this fallacy often pride themselves on being practical when they're actually handcuffing progress to an impossible ideal. Gambler's fallacy. The roulette wheel has landed on black 6 times in a row. The crowd at the casino murmurs with excitement as a man confidently places his entire savings on red. "It's due to hit," he whispers to his horrified wife. "Law of averages. It has to balance out." The wheel spins, the ball bounces, and black again. The man stands dumbfounded, watching his retirement fund disappear. "That's impossible," he mutters. "The odds were overwhelmingly in my favor." But they weren't. He just fell prey to the gambler's fallacy, the mistaken belief that random events become due for a correction. This cognitive error stems from our deep-seated misunderstanding of how randomness works. We expect random sequences to look fair and balanced in small samples, when true randomness often creates streaks and patterns that appear suspiciously non-random to our pattern-seeking brains. Each spin of a roulette wheel, flip of a coin, or shuffle of cards has no memory of previous outcomes. The roulette wheel doesn't know it landed on black 6 times. The coin doesn't remember coming up heads. Yet our minds insist these inanimate objects must somehow balance themselves out. The fallacy extends far beyond casinos. Expectant parents who have had 3 girls believe they're due for a boy. Basketball fans think a player who's missed several shots is due to make the next one. Or conversely, that a hot streak must inevitably end. Investors sell stocks after they've risen, assuming they must fall soon, or hold failing investments believing they must recover. What makes this fallacy so persistent is that sometimes regression to the mean does occur naturally. A baseball player hitting far above his average likely will return to normal performance, not because he was due for a slump, but because his true skill level eventually asserts itself against a streak of luck. The error lies in applying this thinking to truly random, independent events. The weather doesn't owe you sunshine after a week of rain. The lottery doesn't owe you a win after years of losses. Random processes are cruelly indifferent to our sense of fairness or balance. Our ancestors evolved in environments where pattern recognition was crucial for survival. Those who could predict recurring events, seasonal changes, animal migration patterns, weather cycles, thrived. We're descendants of the world's best pattern spotters, even when those patterns are mere illusions. Strawman Fallacy. During a neighborhood meeting about a proposed bike lane, Maria suggests, "I think we should consider adding a protected bike path on Main Street to improve safety." Ted immediately stands up, face reddening. "So you want to destroy local businesses by eliminating all parking and forcing everyone to ride bikes in the snow and rain? What about elderly people who can't ride bikes? Why do you hate car owners and want to punish them?" The room grows tense as Maria stares in confusion, wondering how her modest proposal for a single bike lane morphed into a radical anti-car crusade. This is the Strawman Fallacy in action, the argumentative equivalent of punching a mannequin and declaring victory over Muhammad Ali. Named after the practice of creating fake soldiers from straw for combat training, opponents that look real but can't fight back. This fallacy involves distorting someone's actual position into an exaggerated, extreme, or ridiculous version that's easier to attack. Rather than engaging with what the person actually said, the arguer substitutes a straw man they can easily demolish. Political debates practically run on straw men. We should consider more background checks for gun purchases becomes they want to confiscate every gun in America. We should reform healthcare transforms into they want government bureaucrats deciding if your grandmother lives or dies. Each distortion replaces a nuanced position with a caricature designed for easy demolition. The straw man works through several mechanisms. First, it pushes the original position to an absurd extreme. Second, it often injects emotional triggers and frightening consequences never mentioned by the original speaker. Third, it attributes the worst possible motives to opponents, transforming reasonable ideas into malicious schemes. What makes this fallacy particularly effective is that the distortion often contains a grain of truth, just enough to seem plausible to observers unfamiliar with the original position. And once someone's forced to defend against the straw man, no, I don't hate car owners, the conversation has already been derailed from the actual proposal. The straw man serves as a conversational escape hatch. Rather than engaging with challenging ideas, the arguer creates a flimsy substitute they can easily knock down. It's intellectual shadowboxing that creates the illusion of winning without landing a single blow on the actual argument. Next time you hear, "So what you're really saying is," followed by something the person definitely wasn't saying, you're witnessing the creation of a straw man, a position stuffed with mischaracterizations and ready to be set ablaze. Post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. Your friend Marcus wears his lucky socks to the championship game, and his team wins. Next week, he wears them again. Another victory. Soon, he's wearing those increasingly pungent socks to every game, refusing to wash them lest he wash away the luck. When you suggest maybe it's the team's skill, not his footwear, that's winning games, he looks at you like you've suggested the earth is flat. The evidence is clear, he insists. Every time I wear these socks, we win. When I forgot them for the semi-final last year, we lost by 20 points. These socks are literally magic. Welcome to post hoc ergo propter hoc, Latin for after this, therefore because of this. The fallacy that transforms coincidence into causation faster than you can say correlation. This error in reasoning assumes that because event B followed event A in time, event A must have caused event B. It's the logical equivalent of assuming that because the rooster crows before sunrise, the rooster causes the sun to rise. Apologies to any roosters reading this who thought they controlled the solar system. Our brains are hardwired to spot patterns and connections. It's how our ancestors survived. See lightning, hear thunder, make connection, eat strange berries, get sick, avoid berries. This pattern recognition superpower helped us survive, but it also makes us surprisingly bad at distinguishing coincidence from causation. The post hoc fallacy lurks everywhere. I took this supplement and my cold went away. Colds naturally resolve in a week. The economy improved after my candidate took office. Economic cycles have multiple complex causes. I got a headache after walking under a ladder. The construction noise nearby was the more likely culprit. Social media has supercharged this fallacy. Someone posts, "I ate kale and my skin cleared up." Suddenly, thousands believe in the miraculous dermatological properties of a leafy green, ignoring countless other variables. Changes in weather, hormones, stress levels, other dietary changes, or simply the natural clearing cycle of skin issues. The most pernicious aspect of post hoc reasoning is how convincing it feels. The sequence is clear, the pattern seems obvious, and our personal experience feels more trustworthy than abstract statistical reasoning. When we experience B following A repeatedly, the connection becomes almost impossible to dislodge from our thinking. The scientific method was developed precisely to combat this fallacy, requiring controlled experiments that account for other variables and can be replicated. Without this discipline, we're all just superstitious humans wearing metaphorical lucky socks. Tranquility fallacy. During a heated family dinner, your sister criticizes your excessive smartphone use. You're always glued to that screen. It's unhealthy and antisocial. Rather than considering her point, you immediately snap back. That's rich, coming from someone who binge watches Netflix every weekend. You spent 6 hours straight watching that new show yesterday. Your sister rolls her eyes. We're not talking about me right now. You smirk triumphantly, feeling you've won the argument, even though you're still checking Twitter under the table. You've just deployed the tranquility fallacy, pronounced tranquility, Latin for you also, the argumentative equivalent of responding, I know you are, but what am I, with a fancy classical education. This fallacy, sometimes called the appeal to hypocrisy, attempts to deflect criticism by pointing out that the critic is guilty of the same behavior they're criticizing. It's the grown-up version of a child responding to an accusation by pointing at their sibling and shouting, but they did it too. The logical error is subtle but significant. Whether the critic is hypocritical has absolutely no bearing on whether their criticism is valid. A chain-smoking doctor's advice to quit smoking remains medically sound, despite their personal habits. An environmentalist who occasionally flies can still be correct about climate change. The criticism should be evaluated on its own merits, regardless of who delivers it. Tranquility appears constantly in political discourse. When Party A criticizes Party B's policies, the immediate response is often, but when you were in power, you did something similar. The actual merit of the criticism gets buried under accusations of hypocrisy, and substantive debate disappears. This fallacy works because it triggers our innate sense of fairness. The hypocrisy genuinely feels relevant. Who likes taking criticism from someone guilty of the same fault? It also offers an emotionally satisfying way to counterattack rather than defend. Pointing out hypocrisy is easier than examining our own behavior or arguments. What makes tranquility particularly seductive is that hypocrisy does matter in some contexts, especially when evaluating someone's character or trustworthiness. A person who consistently fails to practice what they preach might indeed have credibility issues, but that doesn't automatically invalidate their arguments. The tranquility fallacy transforms arguments from, is this claim true, to, is this person perfect enough to make it? Ensuring that no criticism survives because no critic is flawless. Slippery slope fallacy. A town council meeting erupts into chaos when a simple proposal to add a small bike lane is introduced. One resident grabs the microphone. Today it's just a bike lane, but where does it end? First bikes, then they'll ban parking on Main Street. Soon they'll prohibit cars downtown entirely. Before you know it, we'll be forced to surrender our driver's licenses, sell our vehicles, and ride communal bicycles assigned by the government. Is that the future you want for your children? A socialist bicycle regime where freedom dies under the wheels of mandatory eco-transportation, the room falls silent as everyone contemplates this dystopian bicycle dictatorship, all supposedly triggered by painting a 6-foot strip on the side of one road. This is the slippery slope fallacy in full terrifying action. The argumentative equivalent of claiming that buying a houseplant will inevitably result in your home becoming an impenetrable jungle within months. The fallacy works by suggesting that a relatively minor action will trigger a chain of increasingly dramatic events, culminating in some extreme outcome, all without providing evidence that each step necessarily leads to the next. It transforms modest proposals into apocalyptic scenarios through a series of and then statements that grow more implausible with each link in the chain. Parents are particularly vulnerable to slippery slope thinking. If I let her stay up 30 minutes past bedtime today, soon she'll be staying up all night. Her grades will plummet. She won't get into college, and she'll live in our basement until she's 40. The moderation option, occasionally allowing special exceptions while maintaining general rules, disappears in the avalanche of imagined consequences. What makes this fallacy so persuasive is that some slopes actually are slippery. History does show examples of gradual changes leading to significant shifts. The error lies in assuming that all proposed changes inevitably lead to extreme outcomes without establishing the causal connections between each step. The slippery slope appears everywhere. If we ban this type of gun, eventually all guns will be banned. If we allow this book in libraries, soon all moral standards will collapse. If we legalize this medication, everyone will become addicted to drugs. Each argument bypasses discussion of the actual proposal by shifting focus to an imagined catastrophic endpoint. When you hear someone rapidly progressing from a modest change to civilization's collapse in 3 steps or fewer, you're witnessing the slippery slope fallacy, where even the smallest step apparently leads straight off a cliff. False dilemma. Fallacy. Your teenage daughter comes home with blue hair. When you express surprise, she becomes defensive. "It's my identity, Dad. Either you support my self-expression completely, or you're trying to control me and crush my individuality." You attempt to explain that you're just processing the change, but she's already stormed off, having categorized you as either a perfect ally or a total oppressor, with no middle ground possible. Welcome to the false dilemma fallacy, also called the false dichotomy or black and white thinking, the logical equivalent of offering someone a menu with only chicken or fish when the kitchen actually serves a dozen different meals. This fallacy occurs when someone presents a situation as having only 2 possible options, outcomes, or sides, when in reality, more alternatives exist. It artificially restricts the range of solutions by pretending the extreme positions are the only choices available, effectively erasing the rich spectrum of possibilities between them. The false dilemma thrives in our polarized discourse. Either you support this policy completely, or you hate America. You're either with us or against us. Either we implement my solution, or we do absolutely nothing. Each framing eliminates the nuanced middle where compromise and thoughtful solutions often reside. Marketing exploits this fallacy constantly. Either buy our premium package, or settle for inferior service. Political campaigns reduce complex issues to binary choices. Vote for me or watch the country collapse. Religious discussions present salvation as all or nothing. Either accept every teaching or reject spiritual truth entirely. What makes this fallacy so powerful is that humans naturally gravitate toward cognitive simplicity. Binary thinking requires less mental energy than navigating nuance. Our tribal instincts also prefer clear lines between us and them, making the false dilemma emotionally satisfying despite its logical flaws. The false dilemma acts like conversational caltrops, stopping nuanced discussion in its tracks. Once the artificial binary is established, energy shifts to debating which of the two options is better, rather than questioning whether these are actually the only choices available. The antidote lies in the simple question, are these really the only two possibilities? Almost invariably, the answer is no. Between unrestricted freedom and total control, between complete agreement and absolute opposition, between perfect solution and do nothing, there exists a vast territory of compromise, partial solutions, and nuanced perspectives. Ad hominem fallacy. During a contentious board meeting, Sophia presents detailed research showing the company should invest in renewable energy. The numbers are compelling: cost savings within 3 years, positive PR, reduced environmental impact. As she finishes, the CFO doesn't address a single data point. Instead, he smirks. Interesting presentation. But let's remember that Sophia drives an SUV and once worked for an oil company. Pretty hypocritical for someone suddenly claiming to care about the environment, don't you think? The room fills with uncomfortable murmurs as Sophia's carefully researched proposal drowns in a sea of irrelevant personal attacks. This is the ad hominem fallacy in action, Latin for to the person, the argumentative equivalent of ignoring the message because you don't like the messenger. This fallacy occurs when someone responds to an argument by attacking the person making it rather than addressing the argument itself. It shifts attention from the substance of what's being said to the character, circumstances, or alleged motives of who's saying it. It's like critiquing the painter instead of evaluating the painting. Ad hominem appears in various flavors. The classic version attacks character. Don't listen to her views on healthcare. She cheated on her taxes. The circumstantial version questions motives. He only supports this regulation because his company would benefit. The Tukokwe version, covered earlier, points out hypocrisy. How can you criticize meat consumption when you wore leather shoes last week? What makes this fallacy so pervasive is that it works psychologically, even while failing logically. When someone's character is questioned, audiences often transfer that doubt to their arguments. It's a cognitive shortcut. If we don't trust the source, we don't bother evaluating their claims. Plus, personal attacks trigger emotional responses that cloud rational assessment. Political discourse is particularly saturated with ad hominem arguments. Rather than debating policy merits, discussions devolve into examining candidates' personal histories, appearance, speaking styles, or family lives, none of which have any bearing on whether their proposals would actually work. The ad hominem creates a dangerous loophole in reasoning. If arguments can be dismissed based on who makes them, then unpopular truths can be rejected regardless of their factual basis. Someone with flaws, which is everyone, could never successfully argue anything, even when they're absolutely right. Remember that flawed messengers can deliver accurate messages. Einstein's theory of relativity would be just as valid even if Einstein had been a terrible person. Truth doesn't become less true when spoken by imperfect humans. Cherry-picking fallacy. The pharmaceutical company's TV commercial is a masterpiece of persuasion. In clinical trials, 85% of patients reported improvement with miracle drug trademark. The spokesperson beams, while testimonials from satisfied patients scroll across the screen. What they don't mention, they conducted 12 different studies, but only publicize the single study with positive results. They also conveniently omit that in this successful study, 80% of patients on the placebo also improved. The sample size was tiny, and several participants experienced serious side effects. Meanwhile, the 11 unpublished studies showed the drug performed no better than sugar pills. Welcome to cherry picking, the fallacy of carefully selecting only the evidence that supports your conclusion, while conveniently ignoring everything that contradicts it. Like a shopper selecting only the ripest, most perfect cherries from the bin, while leaving the bruised ones behind. The cherry picker curates reality to present a distorted picture that appears compelling but lacks integrity. It's confirmation bias with a marketing degree. This fallacy thrives in science reporting, where complex studies get reduced to headline-friendly soundbites. Chocolate prevents heart disease, grabs attention, while, in one small study with numerous limitations, a specific type of dark chocolate showed a modest correlation with slightly improved cardiovascular markers in a non-diverse population, doesn't sell newspapers. Politicians cherry-pick economic statistics mercilessly. If unemployment drops but inflation rises, one party highlights the job numbers, while the other emphasizes rising prices. Both cite accurate figures, yet neither presents the complete economic picture. Health and diet advice practically runs on cherry-picked research. Supplement companies cite the one study showing marginal benefits for their product, while ignoring dozens showing no effect. Diet gurus reference the single small study supporting their approach, while dismissing the larger body of evidence suggesting more moderate approaches. What makes cherry-picking especially dangerous is that it's technically not lying. The selected facts are often true in isolation. This gives the cherry-picker plausible deniability. I never said anything false. The deception lies not in presenting falsehoods, but in deliberately creating a misleading impression through strategic omission. The digital age has supercharged this fallacy. With billions of data points available, anyone can find evidence supporting almost any position. The challenge isn't finding supporting information, it's considering all relevant information before drawing conclusions. Next time you encounter a suspiciously perfect argument, ask yourself, what might be left out of this picture? What contradictory evidence exists? Are we seeing the whole orchard or just the prettiest cherries? Appeal to nature fallacy. At the farmer's market, a woman sells homemade soap at a booth adorned with pictures of forests and flowers. Unlike those toxic commercial brands full of chemicals, my soap is all natural, she explains to a customer examining the $15 bar. That's why it's better for you and the environment. When a chemistry student points out that everything, including her soap, is made of chemicals, and that many natural substances like arsenic and poison ivy are harmful, while many synthetic materials are safe, the vendor looks offended. I don't believe in all that science mumbo-jumbo, she declares. Nature knows best. That's all we need to understand. This is the appeal to nature fallacy in full bloom. The assumption that natural automatically means good, healthy, and superior, while artificial or synthetic means bad, harmful, and inferior. This fallacy equates naturalness with goodness without logical justification. It creates a false moral hierarchy where proximity to nature determines value, regardless of actual effects or evidence. It's thinking that confuses is, what exists in nature, with ought, what is good or right. The appeal to nature permeates modern marketing. Natural ingredients and chemical-free labels, though nothing is actually chemical-free, command premium prices. Food products boast about lacking artificial preservatives while using natural preservatives that are chemically identical. Natural remedies are promoted as inherently safer than synthetic medications, though many natural substances are highly toxic and many life-saving medications are synthetic. What makes this fallacy so persuasive is that it contains a grain of truth. Many natural systems and substances are indeed beneficial, evolved over millions of years, but nature also produced smallpox, hemlock, hurricanes, and painful childbirth. Meanwhile, human innovation has created antibiotics, anesthesia, clean drinking water, and technologies that extend and improve life. The fallacy creates strange inconsistencies in thinking. The same person who refuses artificial ingredients might happily use smartphones, drive cars, live in climate-controlled houses, and benefit from modern medicine when seriously ill. Natural childbirth is praised until complications arise. Then hospital interventions become welcome. The appeal to nature reflects a romantic nostalgia for an imagined past when humans lived in harmony with their environment, untainted by modern problems. It's a reaction to legitimate concerns about technological overreach and environmental damage. Sunk cost fallacy. The movie is terrible. Wooden acting, plot holes big enough to drive a truck through, and special effects that would embarrass a high school film club. After an hour, your partner whispers, "This is awful. Want to leave?" You consider it, then shake your head. "We've already paid for the tickets, and we've sat through half of it. Might as well stay till the end." 2 excruciating hours later, you emerge from the theatre, having lost not just the ticket price, but an entire evening of your life that you'll never get back. Welcome to the sunk cost fallacy, the irrational tendency to continue investing in something based solely on your previous investment, even when cutting your losses is clearly the better choice. This cognitive trap operates on a simple but powerful principle. The more you've already invested, time, money, effort, emotion, the harder it becomes to abandon that investment, even when continuing will cost more than it returns. It's the gambler's desperate double down after a losing streak, the additional thousands poured into a failing renovation project, or the extra years spent in a dead-end relationship because we've been together so long. The fallacy creates a special kind of mathematical blindness. Instead of asking, "What will give me the best outcome from this point forward?" we ask, "How can I avoid feeling like what I've already invested was wasted?" We throw good resources after bad, hoping somehow to retroactively justify our past decisions. Businesses fall prey to this thinking constantly. Companies continue developing products that market research shows nobody wants because we've already spent millions on R&D. Organizations maintain failing strategies because we've invested too much to change course now. The rational question, will additional investment yield positive returns, gets overshadowed by the emotional question, how can we avoid admitting we made a mistake? The sunk cost fallacy explains why people finish terrible books, stay in unfulfilling careers, keep clothes they never wear, and sit through entire Netflix series that lost their appeal after episode 3. The previous investment creates a psychological debt we feel compelled to recover, even at the cost of future happiness. What makes this fallacy so pernicious is that persistence and commitment are often virtuous. We're taught not to be quitters, to push through difficulties, to finish what we start. The sunk cost fallacy exploits these admirable qualities, turning determination into self-sabotage. Circular reasoning fallacy. A heated debate unfolds in your philosophy class about the existence of a higher power. One student confidently declares, "God exists because the Bible says so, and we know the Bible is true because it's the Word of God." When another student points out the circular logic, the first student seems genuinely confused. I don't see the problem. It makes perfect sense to me. The professor smiles, recognizing a textbook example of circular reasoning, an argument that travels in a perfect loop, arriving precisely where it began without making any actual progress. This is circular reasoning, the logical equivalent of a dog chasing its own tail, expending energy but going nowhere. Also called begging the question in formal logic, circular reasoning occurs when an argument's conclusion is sneakily used as one of its premises. Instead of providing independent evidence for a claim, the argument assumes the very thing it's trying to prove. It's like defining a word using the word itself. What is happiness? It's the state of being happy. The circularity often remains hidden because the conclusion and premise are phrased differently enough to create the illusion of an actual argument. Freedom of speech is essential because people should be able to express their opinions freely. This sounds reasonable until you realize freedom of speech and expressing opinions freely are the same concept, just worded differently. Legal and political arguments frequently employ this fallacy. This practice is immoral because it's wrong. This policy is good for the economy because it promotes economic growth. This law is constitutional because it doesn't violate the Constitution. Each statement merely restates its claim rather than supporting it with evidence. What makes circular reasoning so pervasive is that it creates the comforting feeling of logical consistency while requiring zero intellectual effort. There's no need to gather evidence or consider counter-arguments when your conclusion is predetermined by your premise. It's logical fast food, satisfying in the moment, but ultimately empty. The circularity becomes most apparent when dealing with fundamental beliefs. My political party is best because it supports the right policies. This religion is true because its sacred texts say so. This scientific theory is correct because experiments confirm it. Each statement begs for the missing middle step. Independent criteria for determining right policies, true religions, or correct theories. Circular reasoning often masquerades as profound wisdom. By presenting the same idea in different words, it creates the illusion of depth while actually saying nothing substantive at all. Red herring fallacy. You confront your roommate about never washing dishes. You've left dirty plates in the sink for 2 weeks straight. We agreed everyone would clean up after themselves. He looks at you earnestly and replies, "You know, I was reading about the water crisis in developing nations. Millions don't even have access to clean water." Makes you think about how privileged we are to worry about dishes, doesn't it? I'm actually considering volunteering for water charity this summer. Want to join me? 20 minutes later, you're discussing global water conservation, while the crusty dishes remain untouched in the sink, and you've completely forgotten your original complaint. You've been bamboozled by a red herring, the argumentative equivalent of a magician's look at my right hand while the left performs the trick. Named after the practice of dragging smoked fish across a trail to throw hunting dogs off the scent, a red herring introduces an irrelevant topic to divert attention from the original issue. It's not directly addressing the argument, it's changing the subject to something emotionally engaging, but ultimately unrelated. Politicians are grandmasters of this technique. When asked about a corruption scandal, they pivot to patriotism. I've always put America first. When questioned about failed policies, they switch to attacking their opponents. The original topic vanishes in a cloud of emotional distraction. The red herring thrives in personal relationships too. Couples arguing about household responsibilities suddenly find themselves discussing who said what at a party 3 years ago. Parents questioning teens about missed curfews receive impassioned speeches about trust and independence. The actual issue, dirty dishes, broken promises, missed deadlines, gets lost in the rhetorical shuffle. What makes this fallacy so effective is that the diversion usually contains a grain of truth or emotional appeal. Global water access is important. Patriotism does matter. Trust is essential in relationships. The distraction topic isn't necessarily wrong, it's just irrelevant to the original discussion. The red herring succeeds because humans are naturally distractible, especially when the new topic triggers stronger emotions than the original one. Guilt about unwashed dishes pales compared to global crises. Specific policy questions feel dry compared to stirring appeals to values and identity. Next time, a conversation inexplicably drifts from the original topic. Ask yourself, am I following a red herring? The answer might reveal why that important issue you raised never actually got resolved. Begging the question fallacy. Your company's annual review is approaching, and you ask your manager how to earn the highest performance rating. She responds with complete confidence. To get an exceptional rating, you need to demonstrate exceptional performance. When you ask what specific behaviors constitute exceptional performance, she repeats, it's when you perform at an exceptional level. After 5 minutes of this conversational carousel, you realize you're no closer to understanding what you need to do than when you started. Your manager has perfectly illustrated the fallacy of begging the question, using a claim to prove itself. Begging the question, or circular reasoning in a slightly different form, occurs when an argument's conclusion is quietly embedded within its premises. Rather than providing actual evidence, the argument simply restates the claim in different words, creating an illusion of proof where none exists. It's like trying to stay dry in the rain by hiding under yourself. This fallacy gets its strange name from a mistranslation of the Latin petitio principii, which originally meant assuming the initial point. In formal logic, it means assuming what you're trying to prove. Though nowadays, people often say, that begs the question, to mean that raises the question, its original meaning identifies this specific logical error. The fallacy appears in countless forms. This alternative medicine works because many people have experienced healing from it. But does it actually heal, or are other factors involved? Smoking cigarettes is wrong because it's immoral to smoke. But why is it immoral? Free will exists because humans make choices freely. This merely restates the claim rather than proving it. Political discourse thrives on question begging. Its policy is un-American because it contradicts American values. Without defining those values or explaining why they should be followed, the argument collapses into circularity. Academic papers aren't immune either. A student writes, Shakespeare was the greatest playwright because no playwright was better. The professor sighs, seeing no actual evidence for the claim. What makes this fallacy particularly insidious is its invisibility. The circular nature often remains hidden because the conclusion and premise use different wording for the same concept. Violent games cause aggression because they make players more violent. Sounds like an explanation until you realize it's merely restating the claim. Begging the question creates a closed logical system that admits no outside evidence. Like a snake eating its own tail, the argument sustains itself while going nowhere. Appeal to emotion fallacy. The animal shelter commercial begins with slow, melancholic piano music. Close-up shots of sad-eyed puppies and kittens in cages fill the screen as a gentle voice narrates. Every day, these innocent animals wait for someone to love them. Some have waited their entire lives. The camera zooms in on a particularly forlorn-looking dog, a single tear seemingly about to fall from its eye, though you suspect some creative cinematography. For just 50 cents a day, less than your morning coffee, you can save a life. By the end of the 60-second spot, you're sobbing into your couch cushion and reaching for your credit card, having received virtually no concrete information about the organization's effectiveness, how your money will be used, or whether there are more efficient ways to help animals. Welcome to the appeal to emotion fallacy, when arguments bypass your rational faculties and aim straight for your heartstrings. This fallacy occurs when someone attempts to win an argument by manipulating emotions rather than presenting valid evidence or reasoning. Instead of addressing whether a claim is true or a policy is effective, the appeal to emotion tries to make you feel so strongly that you'll accept the conclusion without adequate logical support. Political campaigns practically run on emotional appeals. Campaign ads show candidates with families, playing with puppies, or visiting veterans, creating positive emotional associations without addressing policy substance. Fear-based appeals warn that opponents will destroy the economy/environment/country using ominous music and grayscale footage to bypass critical thinking. Advertising is perhaps the most prolific employer of emotional appeals. Luxury car commercials rarely discuss engineering specifications. Instead, they show beautiful people having adventures, suggesting that buying the car will transform your life similarly. Beauty products don't just sell moisturizer, they sell hope, confidence, and social acceptance. What makes this fallacy so powerful is that emotions are an essential part of being human. We are not purely rational creatures, and emotions often provide valuable information. The problem arises when emotions become substitutes for evidence rather than companions to it. The appeal to emotion works because our feelings can hijack our reasoning processes. Strong emotions, particularly fear, guilt, pride, and compassion, activate different brain regions than analytical thinking, making critical evaluation more difficult. When we're emotionally aroused, our ability to spot logical flaws diminishes significantly. Next time you feel strongly moved by an argument, advertisement, or appeal, pause and ask, beyond how this makes me feel, what actual evidence supports this claim? Your emotions deserve a voice, just not the only voice, in your decision-making process. Hasty generalization fallacy. Your co-worker Janet returns from her vacation to Italy, fuming about her experience. "Italians are the rudest people on earth," she declares during lunch. "Every restaurant had terrible service. One waiter completely ignored us, another got our order wrong and didn't apologize, and a third rushed us through our meal." When asked if she had any positive interactions, she dismisses the question. "The hotel concierge was nice, I guess, but he was probably just after a big tip. Trust me, I spent 5 days there. Italians simply don't understand customer service." She's now advising everyone in the office to vacation elsewhere, based on her brief experience in one city, at a handful of establishments during peak tourist season. This is hasty generalization in action, the logical equivalent of taste testing a single grape and declaring the entire harvest sour. This fallacy occurs when someone draws a broad conclusion about an entire group, phenomenon, or population based on an inadequate or unrepresentative sample. It's the cognitive leap from "I observed X a few times" to "X is universally true," without considering whether those observations are sufficient or representative. We're all guilty of hasty generalizations. "I got food poisoning at a Mexican restaurant, so Mexican food is unsafe. I know 2 rude Canadians, so Canadians aren't actually polite." The first 3 chapters of this book were boring, so the whole thing must be terrible. Each conclusion dramatically exceeds what the limited evidence can support. The fallacy flourishes in prejudice and stereotyping. That driver who cut me off was elderly, confirming that old people can't drive. The 2 teenagers who were loud in the movie theatre prove that today's youth have no respect. Each instance takes limited interactions and transforms them into sweeping judgments about entire categories of people. What makes hasty generalizations so natural is that our brains are pattern recognition machines designed to draw conclusions from limited data, an evolutionary advantage for quick decision-making. When primitive humans encountered a few poisonous red berries, concluding red berries are dangerous might save their lives, even if some red berries were actually safe. The modern world requires more nuanced thinking. Scientific understanding depends on appropriate sample sizes, controlling variables, and representative sampling. Methodological safeguards against the hasty generalization our brains naturally make. False cause fallacy. Every morning, Raj performs the same ritual. He wears his lucky tie, takes exactly 7 sips of coffee, and taps his desk 3 times before checking the stock market. Today, his investments are up 2%. See, he tells his skeptical colleague, the system works. His colleague points out that the entire market is up due to a surprise interest rate announcement. Raj shrugs. Maybe that's what they want you to think. All I know is that whenever I skip my routine, my stocks tank. Last month I forgot the desk taps and lost $300 that day. The data speaks for itself. He then begins meticulously planning tomorrow's identical ritual, convinced his morning habits are directly influencing global financial markets. This is the false cause fallacy, the mistaken belief that because 2 events occur together, one must have caused the other. Also known as cum hoc ergo propter hoc. With this, therefore because of this, or the causal fallacy, it involves jumping to conclusions about causation without sufficient evidence. It's seeing 2 things happen in sequence or together and assuming one caused the other, when they might be coincidental or both caused by some third factor. This fallacy permeates daily life. Sports fans wear the same unwashed jersey during winning streaks, convinced their clothing choices influence game outcomes. People claim headaches disappear after wearing copper bracelets, ignoring that most headaches naturally resolve over time. Celebrities thank their bizarre wellness routines for their success, overlooking factors like genetics, privilege, and professional teams of dietitians and trainers. The false cause fallacy thrives in health discussions. I started taking this supplement and my arthritis improved, never considering that weather changes, activity levels, medication, or natural fluctuations in symptoms might be responsible. When we're desperate for relief or control, we're quick to attribute improvements to whatever new intervention we've tried. The digital age exacerbates this fallacy through spurious correlations. Websites showcase absurd statistical relationships, like how cheese consumption correlates perfectly with people dying by becoming tangled in their bedsheets, or how the divorce rate in Maine tracks with per capita margarine consumption. These ridiculous examples highlight how easily we can find correlations that have no causal relationship. What makes this fallacy so compelling is our brain's innate drive to find patterns and explanations. Randomness feels uncomfortable. Causation provides comfort. Believing your morning ritual affects stock prices feels more empowering than acknowledging markets are unpredictable and largely beyond your control. Burden of proof fallacy. During your family reunion, Uncle Frank makes a startling announcement over dinner. I've discovered that drinking pickle juice mixed with cranberry juice cures baldness. I've been taking it for 3 months. When your cousin, a medical researcher, expresses skepticism, Uncle Frank's eyes narrow. Well, can you prove it doesn't work? No studies have ever disproven my specific mixture. The medical establishment is too afraid to test it because they'd lose billions in hair loss treatments. He crosses his arms triumphantly, adding, "Until you can show me definitive evidence that it doesn't work, my claim stands. The burden is on you, skeptics, to disprove me." This is the burden of proof fallacy in full glory. The erroneous belief that a claim is true until proven false, rather than understanding that the person making a claim bears the responsibility for supporting it. The proper distribution of the burden of proof follows a simple principle. Whoever asserts a claim carries the responsibility of providing evidence for it. It's not the critic's job to disprove the claim. It's the claimant's job to prove it. As the saying goes, what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. This fallacy appears constantly in conspiracy theories. The government is hiding aliens at Area 51. Prove they aren't. The Earth is flat. Show me irrefutable proof it's round. Each demand incorrectly shifts the burden to the skeptic rather than the person making the extraordinary claim. Religious and philosophical debates often feature burden shifting. You can't prove God doesn't exist. Therefore, belief is rational. This reverses the logical responsibility. Absence of disproof doesn't constitute proof. What makes this fallacy so persistent is that proving a negative is often difficult or impossible. How can you definitively prove unicorns don't exist somewhere in the universe? You can't examine every location simultaneously. This limitation becomes a convenient shield for unfalsifiable claims. The fallacy also exploits a common misconception about skepticism. Skepticism isn't about definitively disproving every possible claim. It's about proportioning belief to evidence. Without supporting evidence, the default position should be withholding belief, not accepting the claim. In courtrooms, we recognize this principle with innocent until proven guilty. The burden lies with the prosecution making the accusation, not with the defendant to prove innocence. Similarly, in rational discourse, the burden rests with the person asserting something exists, works, or is true. Appeal to authority fallacy. The debate about climate policy in your community forum is heating up when one participant triumphantly types, "Well, my brother-in-law has a PhD in chemistry, and he says climate change is exaggerated." When asked how chemistry expertise specifically qualifies someone to evaluate climate science, they respond indignantly, "He's a doctor of science. He spent years in a lab. He understands these things better than regular people." Are you saying you know more than someone with a doctorate? The conversation grinds to a halt as everyone now debates the brother-in-law's credentials rather than the actual climate data. This is the appeal to authority fallacy. The mistake of accepting a claim as true simply because someone with credentials, status, or popularity said it, rather than because of compelling evidence. Also known as argumentum ad verecundiam. This fallacy substitutes expertise, often in the wrong field, for actual evidence. It essentially argues, important person X believes this, therefore it's true, as if authority creates truth rather than simply recognizing it. The fallacy appears in countless forms. Advertisements feature actors in lab coats recommending toothpaste. Investment schemes boast endorsements from celebrities who know nothing about finance. Political campaigns trumpet endorsements from respected figures with no relevant policy expertise. Each instance asks us to accept claims based on who said them, rather than their factual merit. Importantly, not all appeals to authority are fallacious. Citing genuine experts speaking within their specific field of expertise can be valid, but even then, the expert's conclusions should be supported by evidence and represent the consensus in their field, not just their personal opinion. The appeal to authority becomes particularly problematic when the cited authority lacks relevant expertise. A Nobel Prize-winning physicist's opinions on economics deserve no special weight. A celebrated athlete's views on vaccination carry no more authority than any other non-medical person. Expertise doesn't transfer across unrelated domains. What makes this fallacy so persuasive is our natural tendency to use mental shortcuts. Evaluating complex claims on their merits requires time and specialized knowledge we often lack. It's easier to outsource our thinking to perceived authorities than to analyze evidence ourselves. The digital age has complicated this fallacy further. With credentials easily fabricated or exaggerated online, and the context of expert quotes frequently stripped away, discerning legitimate authority from mere posturing has become increasingly difficult. When someone's primary argument rests on "trust me, I'm an expert" or "famous person X agrees with me," it's worth remembering that even Einstein was wrong sometimes, and the greatest authorities in history have made fundamental mistakes in their own fields. Bandwagon fallacy. Your friend texts you about a new cryptocurrency. Everyone in the office is investing in Hypercoin. Johnson put in $5,000 yesterday, and even the receptionist is buying some. Prices have doubled in a week. You need to get in now before you're the only one missing out. When you ask about the technology behind it, or its fundamental value, he responds, "Does it matter? Millions of people can't be wrong." This many investors wouldn't put their money in something worthless. When everyone's buying, that's when you know it's a good investment. This is the bandwagon fallacy in action. The mistaken belief that something is correct, good, or worthwhile simply because it's popular or many people believe it. Also called appeal to popularity or argumentum ad populum, Latin for appeal to the people. This fallacy assumes that the majority opinion must be right. It follows the flawed logic. If most people believe X or do X, then X must be true or good. It's the logical error behind the parental question. If everyone jumped off a bridge, would you jump too? The fallacy appears everywhere. Fashion trends spread not because particular styles are objectively superior, but because everyone's wearing it. Diets become crazes not because of scientific validation, but because celebrities and influencers promote them. Political movements gain traction through the appearance of widespread support rather than policy merit. Social media has supercharged the bandwagon fallacy. When we see something has thousands of likes or shares, we unconsciously assign it greater credibility. Studies show we're more likely to engage with content that already appears popular, creating snowballing effects where initial popularity, often artificially generated, creates actual popularity. What makes this fallacy so powerful is that humans are fundamentally social creatures. Our ancestors survived by conforming to group norms. Those who strayed too far faced exile, or worse. We're hardwired to follow social cues and fear exclusion. FOMO, fear of missing out, isn't just a modern internet phenomenon. It's an ancient survival mechanism. The bandwagon becomes particularly dangerous when it influences consequential decisions. Medical treatments, investments, political candidates, and moral positions should be evaluated on their merits, not their popularity. History overflows with examples of popular ideas that were catastrophically wrong. From bloodletting to eugenics to tulip mania. When something's primary selling point is, everyone else is doing it, pause and ask what would make it worthwhile, even if you were the only person choosing it. True value doesn't require a crowd to validate it. Personal incredulity fallacy. Your uncle dismisses evolution during Thanksgiving dinner. Look, I just can't wrap my head around how something as complex as the human eye could develop by accident. Random mutations creating something that intricate. It's like expecting a tornado in a junkyard to assemble a Boeing 747. It makes no sense to me, so there must be a designer. When your biology major cousin tries explaining how cumulative selection over millions of years differs from random chance, your uncle waves her off. That's all just fancy talk. If I can't understand how it could happen, it probably didn't. Some things are just too complicated to be true. This is the personal incredulity fallacy. The mistake of rejecting an idea simply because you personally find it difficult to understand or imagine. This fallacy follows a deceptively simple logic. I cannot understand or imagine how X could be true, therefore X must be false. It turns personal cognitive limitations into a universal measure of truth, as if reality must conform to our individual comprehension abilities. Personal incredulity appears frequently in discussions of scientific concepts. Quantum physics, with its counterintuitive properties, triggers this fallacy regularly. Particles can't possibly be in two places at once. That makes no sense. The mathematics of infinity, the vastness of geological time, or the complexity of climate systems all fall victim to incredulity-based dismissals. The fallacy thrives in technological discussions. I don't understand how they could possibly track all that data, so tech companies must not really be surveilling us. It appears in economic debates. I can't conceive how a national debt that large could be sustainable, so economic collapse must be imminent. What makes this fallacy so compelling is that it stems from an otherwise healthy skepticism. Questioning claims we don't understand is reasonable. The error comes in assuming our personal comprehension defines the boundaries of what's possible. The fallacy reveals a profound confusion between subjective experience and objective reality. The universe has no obligation to make itself easily understandable to human minds that evolved to track savanna predators, not comprehend quantum mechanics or molecular biology. The personal incredulity fallacy often masquerades as critical thinking. It feels like rational skepticism, but actually represents intellectual surrender, abandoning inquiry precisely when deeper understanding is needed. When you find yourself thinking, I can't imagine how that could work, so it must be wrong, remember that the limits of your imagination aren't the limits of reality. Some of the most profound truths are those that initially seemed most incomprehensible. Equivocation fallacy. During a heated school board meeting, the chairman addresses concerned parents. We promise your children have the right to free expression in our schools. Parents nod approvingly. Later, when students publish a controversial newspaper article criticizing administration policies, the same chairman blocks its distribution, explaining, "We can't allow this disrespectful content. Students are free to express themselves, of course. They can express themselves through approved channels, express themselves in ways that uphold school values, and express themselves at appropriate times. But this isn't expression. This is disruption." A parent stands up. "But you said they have the right to free expression." The chairman smiles condescendingly. "They do have free expression. I just explained what expression means in our school context." This is equivocation in action. The fallacy of deliberately or accidentally shifting the meaning of a term during an argument while pretending it's being used consistently. Equivocation occurs when a key word or phrase is used in different senses within the same argument, creating an illusion of logical connection where none exists. It's verbal sleight of hand, using the same term to mean different things while acting as if it means just one thing throughout. The fallacy appears in countless contexts. Politicians promise reform, implying positive change, then deliver reform, meaning cuts to services. Companies advertise natural ingredients, implying healthfulness, while using natural, meaning merely derived from nature, which includes arsenic and lead. Religious debates feature arguments like faith, trust based on evidence, is important in everyone's life. Therefore, religious faith, belief without evidence, is universal. What makes equivocation particularly deceptive is that it exploits the natural ambiguity of language. Many important words have multiple legitimate meanings: freedom, rights, democracy, natural, theory, love, making it easy to slide between definitions mid-argument without listeners noticing the switch. The fallacy works because our brains process familiar words quickly, often without examining precisely which meaning is being employed. When we hear a term repeatedly, we assume its definition remains constant, even when it's subtly shifting. Equivocation becomes especially problematic in ethical and philosophical discussions. Arguments about whether humans have free will often equivocate between different conceptions of freedom. Debates about whether something is good slide between moral goodness, practical effectiveness, and personal preference. When someone seems to be winning an argument through wordplay rather than substance, look closely at their key terms. You might catch them changing definitions mid-argument, using the same words to mean entirely different things. Middle ground fallacy. Two doctors are examining your test results. The first says, you need to take 100 milligrams of this medication daily. The second vehemently disagrees. No medication is necessary at all. The hospital administrator, with no medical training, steps in to resolve the dispute. Clearly, the reasonable answer is to split the difference. Take 50 milligrams daily. That way everyone's partly right. You look bewildered as both doctors shake their heads in unison. The compromise sounds reasonable, but it's actually the worst possible option. Either the full therapeutic dose or no medication would be safer than half a dose, which could create resistance without providing benefits. Welcome to the middle ground fallacy. The mistaken belief that the truth must always lie somewhere between two opposing positions. Also called the argument to moderation, or golden mean fallacy. This error assumes that compromise between extremes is inherently more reasonable or accurate than either extreme position. It follows the flawed reasoning. If some people say X and others say Y, then the truth must be somewhere in between. The fallacy appears constantly in public discourse. When scientists confirm human-caused climate change and deniers reject it entirely, some insist the reasonable position is that climate change is somewhat human-caused. When medical evidence supports vaccination and anti-vaxxers oppose it, people claim the middle ground of delayed or selective vaccination schedules. Each compromise assumes truth must lie between opposing viewpoints, regardless of evidence. What makes this fallacy so appealing is that compromise often seems intellectually humble and socially harmonious. Taking a middle position lets you appear reasonable while avoiding alignment with either extreme. It creates the comforting illusion of rising above partisan bickering. The middle ground fallacy exploits the fact that in many social situations, compromise genuinely is valuable. In negotiations, finding middle ground between competing interests often yields workable solutions. The error comes in applying this negotiation mindset to factual questions where evidence, not compromise, should determine conclusions. Reality doesn't care about our desire for balance or moderation. Sometimes one extreme is simply correct. The Earth is roughly spherical, not flat. The truth isn't that it's somewhat flat. Evolution explains biological diversity. The middle ground with creationism isn't more accurate. The fallacy becomes particularly dangerous when it creates false equivalence between positions with vastly different evidential support. By treating all positions as equally valid starting points for finding the middle, it elevates fringe views while undermining well-established knowledge. Correlation versus causation fallacy. At your neighborhood association meeting, an elderly resident stands up, voice quavering with certainty. Ever since they installed those 5G towers last year, bird populations have declined 30% in our area. The radiation is killing them. A heated debate erupts until a biology student timidly raises her hand. Actually, the towers went up right before a particularly harsh winter, and the city also removed several old trees around the same time to prevent power line damage. Maybe those factors affected bird habitats. The first speaker dismisses this with a wave. Too much coincidence. The towers went up. The birds declined. It's obvious what's happening. I've been watching birds for 40 years. This is the correlation versus causation fallacy. Mistaking the observation that two things happen together, correlation, for proof that one causes the other, causation. This fundamental error in reasoning assumes that when events or trends occur simultaneously or in sequence, one must be causing the other. It ignores the possibilities that 1. The correlation might be coincidental. 2. Both might be caused by a third factor. 3. The relationship might be reversed. B causes A, not A causes B. Or 4. The relationship might be complex and bidirectional. The fallacy flourishes in health reporting. Study finds coffee drinkers live longer. Perhaps coffee has benefits. Or perhaps people healthy enough to tolerate caffeine were already likely to live longer. It thrives in economic analysis. Crime rates drop when prison populations increase. Or perhaps both are responding to other social factors. It even appears in education. Students who take music lessons have higher math scores. Does music improve math skills? Or do families who provide music lessons also provide other educational advantages? What makes this fallacy so pervasive is that correlations are easy to spot, while causation is difficult to prove. Our pattern recognition brains evolved to notice when things happen together. It was useful for survival. When primitive humans noticed people got sick after eating certain berries, assuming causation was a life-saving shortcut, even without understanding the biochemical mechanisms involved. The digital age has supercharged this fallacy. With enormous datasets available, researchers can find correlations between almost anything. Ice cream sales and drowning rates both increase in summer. Cheese consumption and bedsheet tangling deaths. A genuine statistical correlation with no causal relationship. Or Nicolas Cage movies and swimming pool accidents. Another real but meaningless correlation. Next time you encounter a linked to headline, or hear someone confidently declaring one thing causes another based solely on their co-occurrence, remember the statistician's mantra: correlation does not imply causation. Appeal to tradition fallacy. Your company's quarterly meeting grows tense as a new employee suggests changing the reporting system. Our current method requires double data entry and takes hours longer than necessary. Modern software could automate this. and save each department about 20 hours weekly. The room falls silent until the senior manager, who's been with the company for 30 years, clears his throat. That's an interesting idea, but our current system has served us well for decades. Previous employees built this process with good reasons. If it's not broken, why fix it? This company thrived using these methods before any of this fancy technology existed. Sometimes the old ways are best. Several veteran employees nod sagely, while the new hire slumps in her chair, realizing her evidence-based suggestion can't compete with, "That's how we've always done it." This is the appeal to tradition fallacy, the error of assuming something is better or correct simply because it's established, conventional, or has a long history. The fallacy follows a simple but flawed logic. This is how it's always been done. Therefore, this is how it should continue to be done. It treats longevity as a proxy for quality, assuming that anything that has persisted must necessarily be superior to innovations or alternatives. The appeal to tradition appears across all domains of human activity. In politics, our founding documents shouldn't be reinterpreted for modern times. In education, students have always memorized these facts. Why change the curriculum now? In religion, these rituals have been performed for centuries. Questioning them shows disrespect. In families, everyone in our family has attended this college for generations. You can't break tradition. What makes this fallacy so compelling is that traditions often do contain embedded wisdom. Many practices persist precisely because they work well or solve important problems. Experienced people have seen fads come and go, watching enthusiastic revolutionaries discover the hard way why certain methods evolved as they did. The error lies not in respecting tradition, but in treating age alone as a decisive argument against change. Tradition becomes fallacious when used as a conversation stopper that shields practices from rational evaluation. It treats "we've always done it this way" as a trump card rather than the beginning of a deeper investigation. The appeal to tradition often masks simple resistance to change and the cognitive discomfort of learning new approaches. It can reflect status protection. Expertise in established systems becomes less valuable when those systems change, or genuine risk aversion. Known problems feel safer than unknown ones. Complex question fallacy. The company-wide meeting grows uncomfortable as the CEO addresses an employee. "So have you finally stopped sabotaging our quarterly projects?" The employee freezes, recognizing the impossible situation. If he says yes, he's admitting he previously sabotaged projects but has now stopped. If he says no, he's suggesting he continues to sabotage projects. If he tries to explain that he never sabotaged anything, the CEO interrupts. It's a simple yes or no question. Meanwhile, co-workers whisper the damage already done regardless of his answer. The question itself planted the assumption of guilt in everyone's mind. This is the complex question fallacy, the deceptive practice of embedding an unproven assumption within a question, forcing anyone who answers to implicitly accept that assumption. Also known as a loaded question or presuppositional question, this fallacy creates a linguistic trap, like a prosecuting attorney asking, "Where did you hide the weapon?" Whether the suspect answers, "I didn't hide it," or specifies a location, the question's structure has already established guilt in the minds of jurors. The classic example, "Have you stopped beating your spouse?" demonstrates the fallacy's power. Either a yes or no response accepts the presupposition that spouse beating occurred. The question demands a simple answer to a complex accusation that was never established as fact. Complex questions appear everywhere. Political push polls ask, Do you support the candidate's disastrous economic policy? Market researchers inquire, how much do you enjoy our superior service? Parents demand, why do you always ignore my advice? Each question smuggles in an assumption that remains unproven, yet difficult to challenge within the framework of the question itself. What makes this fallacy particularly insidious is that challenging the question's premise often makes someone appear evasive or defensive. Answer the question becomes a cudgel to force acceptance of hidden assumptions. By the time you're explaining why the question itself is problematic, public perception has already been shaped. The complex question creates a linguistic version of heads I win, tails you lose. Any direct answer validates the question's premise, while refusing to answer appears suspicious. It's argumentative quicksand. Struggling against it often makes you sink deeper. The fallacy exploits our conversational norms. We typically assume questions are asked in good faith and respond accordingly, making it jarring to step back and challenge the question itself. This social expectation creates the perfect environment for hidden assumptions to slip past our critical faculties. When faced with questions that make you uncomfortable, no matter how you answer, examine them for buried assumptions. The real argument might be hiding behind the question mark. Anecdotal evidence fallacy. At your neighborhood health food store, a crowd gathers around a charismatic woman describing her miracle cure. Doctors gave me 6 months to live, stage 4 cancer. But then I discovered this special blend of exotic berries and mushrooms. She holds up an expensive-looking bottle. 3 months of this supplement and my cancer completely disappeared. Scans clear, doctors baffled. When someone asks about clinical studies, she scoffs. I don't need studies, I lived it. Plus, my sister's co-worker tried it for her arthritis, and now she's running marathons. My hairdresser's cousin took it for his diabetes and threw away his insulin. These are real people with real results. What more proof do you need? Several audience members reach for their wallets, convinced by these personal stories despite the complete absence of scientific evidence. This is the anecdotal evidence fallacy, using personal experiences or isolated examples to establish broader patterns or truths, while ignoring more comprehensive data. This reasoning error substitutes compelling stories for systematic evidence. It follows the flawed logic. X happened to me or someone I know, therefore X is generally true. It privileges the vivid and personal over the statistical and methodical. The fallacy thrives in medical discussions. My grandmother smoked 2 packs daily and lived to 95 inches becomes an argument against smoking risks. I didn't wear a seatbelt during my accident and was thrown clear transforms into evidence against seatbelt efficacy. Each personal story, while possibly true, may represent outliers rather than typical outcomes. What makes anecdotal evidence so persuasive is that stories affect us emotionally in ways statistics cannot. Our brains evolved to learn through narrative. A vivid account of one person's experience often feels more real than studies involving thousands of anonymous participants. Personal stories come with faces, emotions, and relatable details that statistics lack. The fallacy exploits availability bias. We give more weight to information we can easily recall or visualize. One friend's dramatic vaccine reaction feels more significant than millions of uneventful vaccinations that never become stories. The dramatic and unusual becomes memorable, while the typical and expected goes unnoticed. Anecdotal evidence isn't worthless. Personal experiences can identify questions worth investigating and provide valuable insights about lived experiences. The error comes in treating anecdotes as definitive proof rather than starting points for more rigorous inquiry. False equivalence fallacy. During a contentious school board meeting, parents debate a proposal to update the science curriculum. One group presents peer-reviewed research supporting evolution, citing thousands of studies and the consensus of major scientific organizations. An opposition speaker then rises. "We've heard one theory, now let's hear both sides," before presenting religious creation stories. When the board suggests giving substantially more time to evolution, given its scientific basis, several attendees object. That's biased. Both perspectives deserve equal time in the classroom. It's only fair to present all viewpoints equally. The board chair looks uncomfortable, caught between scientific consensus and the appearance of balance. This is false equivalence, the fallacy of treating fundamentally unequal things as if they were the same. This error occurs when someone suggests that two positions, ideas, or items deserve equal consideration or treatment, despite significant differences in their evidence, logic, or relevance. It creates a deceptive symmetry between things that may share superficial similarities while ignoring crucial distinctions. False equivalence thrives in media coverage that strives for balance. A climate scientist representing the consensus of thousands of researchers receives equal airtime with a lone contrarian without scientific credentials, creating the impression of equal evidence on both sides. Political reporting equates a politician's minor verbal gaffe with another's documented pattern of deliberate deception, treating vastly different actions as comparable scandals. The fallacy appears in moral reasoning. Everyone does things wrong sometimes, becomes a defense that equates minor errors with serious transgressions. It surfaces in historical discussions. All countries have committed atrocities, flattens crucial differences in scale, intent, and context between different historical events. What makes false equivalence so effective is that it exploits our natural desire for fairness and our discomfort with appearing biased. The call to hear both sides or consider all perspectives equally sounds reasonable and open-minded. Challenging the equivalence can seem elitist or close-minded, even when the comparison is fundamentally flawed. The fallacy becomes particularly dangerous when it creates false balance between expert consensus and fringe positions, between evidence-based conclusions and speculation, or between major and minor transgressions. By placing unlike things on the same plane, it distorts our ability to make proportionate judgments. Sometimes the false equivalence is explicit. X is just like Y. But often it's implied through structure, giving equal time, space, or consideration to unequal positions, or using both sides framing for issues where the evidence heavily favors one perspective. Appeal to consequences fallacy. The university committee reviews data showing that their prestigious overnight orientation program correlates with higher dropout rates for low-income students. The evidence suggests the program's networking activities unintentionally highlight economic disparities, making some students feel they don't belong. As the committee discusses modifications, the alumni representative interrupts. "We can't accept these findings. If we admit this beloved tradition has problems, donations will plummet. The university's reputation would suffer. Faculty morale would decline. Some might even use this to attack other campus traditions. We simply cannot afford to believe this data is accurate." The researchers exchange glances, realizing their evidence is being rejected, not because it's flawed, but because accepting it would lead to uncomfortable consequences. This is the appeal to consequences fallacy. Rejecting or accepting a claim based on whether its implications are desirable rather than whether it's actually true. This error in reasoning confuses what we want to be true with what is true. It follows the flawed logic. If X were true, it would have negative consequences. Therefore, X cannot be true. Or conversely, Y would have positive consequences. Therefore, Y must be true. It substitutes wishful thinking for evidence. The fallacy appears in countless contexts. People reject evidence of environmental problems because accepting it would require lifestyle changes. Parents dismiss signs of their child's misbehavior because acknowledging it would reflect poorly on their parenting. Investors ignore market warning signs because recognizing them would mean losing money. Each instance prioritizes comfortable beliefs over accurate ones. It's crucial to distinguish this fallacy from legitimate consequentialist moral reasoning. It's perfectly valid to consider consequences when deciding what we should do. The fallacy occurs when we use consequences to determine what we should believe is factually true. What makes this fallacy so tempting is that humans naturally avoid cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort that comes from holding contradictory beliefs or from recognizing facts that conflict with our identity or desires. Rejecting uncomfortable truths feels protective in the short term. The appeal to consequences becomes particularly dangerous when addressing serious problems. Climate change, public health crises, economic bubbles, and institutional failures all become harder to address when we reject evidence because we dislike its implications. The fallacy turns potentially solvable problems into unacknowledged disasters. Genetic fallacy. The city council meeting erupts into chaos as residents debate the new traffic proposal. "This plan is absolutely worthless," declares a longtime resident, her voice rising above the murmurs. "Need I remind everyone that this traffic system was originally designed by Councilman Wilson's office? The same Wilson who was caught in that expense scandal last year?" Anything coming from that source is automatically suspicious and corrupt. Several audience members nod vigorously, despite the fact that traffic engineers from 3 independent firms have since reviewed and endorsed the plan, which would objectively reduce congestion by 40% according to simulation models. The proposal's origin has completely overshadowed its actual content. This is the genetic fallacy, the error of evaluating something solely based on its source, origin, or history, rather than its current properties, content, or merits. This fallacy dismisses or accepts ideas by attacking or praising their origins instead of their substance. It follows the flawed reasoning. X comes from source Y. Source Y is bad good. Therefore, X is bad good. It mistakes where something comes from for whether it's currently valid or valuable. The fallacy appears everywhere. People reject scientific findings because they come from institutions they distrust. Religious believers dismiss arguments from atheists or vice versa, regardless of content. Consumers assume products from certain countries are inherently inferior. Political partisans automatically reject proposals from the opposing party without examining their merits. Each instance substitutes judgment about origins for judgment about substance. What makes this fallacy so appealing is that origins sometimes do matter. A source's credibility can be relevant when we lack time to evaluate claims directly. The history of an idea can provide context for understanding it. The error comes when we treat origin as the only relevant factor, ignoring how ideas evolve beyond their beginnings, or how even flawed sources can sometimes produce valid points. The genetic fallacy becomes particularly problematic in polarized environments where tribal identities determine what information is acceptable. It creates intellectual bubbles, where ideas are judged not by their quality, but by whether they come from our side or their side. Composition fallacy. The general manager proudly addresses the press conference. This season, we've assembled the greatest basketball team in history. Every single player on our roster was the top scorer on their previous team. Our point guard averaged 28 points per game. Our shooting guard led his conference in 3-pointers. Our center was MVP last season. The sports journalists nod, dazzled by the individual statistics. 6 months later, the same manager faces the press again, attempting to explain why this dream team finished with a losing record. Somehow, he mutters, they just couldn't play together. The whole became less than the sum of its parts. This is the composition fallacy, the error of assuming that what's true of the parts must necessarily be true of the whole. This reasoning mistake occurs when we automatically transfer attributes from components to the entire system without considering how these elements interact. It follows the flawed logic. Each part has characteristic X. Therefore, the whole must have characteristic X. It ignores emergent properties that exist only at the system level. The fallacy appears across disciplines. In economics, what benefits an individual consumer, saving money, can harm the economy if everyone does it simultaneously. Reduced spending causes recession. In technology, components that work flawlessly in isolation may conflict when integrated. In nutrition, individual foods considered healthy might create an imbalanced diet when combined exclusively. What makes this fallacy so persuasive is our natural tendency toward reductionist thinking, breaking complex systems into simpler parts. This approach works beautifully in many contexts but fails when interactions between components create new properties or behaviors that individual parts don't possess. The composition fallacy leads to numerous planning errors. Organizations hire only star performers, then wonder why teamwork suffers. Cities add lanes to reduce traffic, but discover that more capacity actually increases congestion. Investors build portfolios of individually strong stocks without considering their correlation during market downturns. The error becomes particularly problematic when addressing complex social issues. Immigration policies that might benefit individual communities can create different outcomes at national scale. Educational practices effective in pilot programs may produce unexpected results when implemented system-wide. Division fallacy. The community fundraising chair stands before the town council, visibly frustrated. I don't understand why we're struggling to fund the new library. Our town's average household income is $120,000, one of the highest in the state. Everyone here can easily afford to donate $500. The mayor sighs, knowing what the chair doesn't. The average is dramatically skewed by a few tech executives in the North Hills who earn millions, while nearly 40% of residents are retirees on fixed incomes or service workers barely making ends meet. The town as a whole is wealthy on paper, but assuming each resident shares this characteristic leads to fundamentally misguided expectations. This is the division fallacy, the error of assuming that what's true of the whole must necessarily be true of all or each of its parts. This logical mistake is essentially the reverse of the composition fallacy. It occurs when characteristics of a complete system, group, or entity are incorrectly attributed to individual components. It follows the flawed reasoning. The whole has characteristic X. Therefore, each part must have characteristic X. It ignores how diversity within systems creates aggregate properties that individual elements don't share. The fallacy appears in numerous contexts. People assume that because a company is profitable, each department must be profitable. They believe that because a nation is democratically governed, each decision within it must be democratically determined. They conclude that because a university is prestigious, every professor and program within it must be equally distinguished. Each assumption incorrectly transfers attributes from whole to parts. What makes this fallacy so common is our tendency to simplify complex systems through generalization. Our brains naturally seek cognitive efficiency by applying broad characteristics evenly across components, even when this creates inaccurate understandings. The division fallacy creates particular problems in social policy. Programs designed for average Americans often fail to serve actual individuals whose circumstances differ from statistical means. Healthcare systems built around typical patients may inadequately address those whose needs deviate from the norm. Educational approaches designed for the average student can leave many learners poorly served. Appeal to fear fallacy. The local school board meeting grows tense as a parent approaches the microphone, voice trembling with emotion. If you approve these new science textbooks that mention evolution, you'll destroy our children's faith and moral compass. Without religious foundations, they'll have no reason to be good people. We'll see rampant drug use, teen pregnancy, and violence in our hallways. Is that what you want? Do you want to be responsible for creating a generation of nihilistic criminals? Because that's exactly what will happen if you vote for these godless books. The board members glance nervously at each other, acutely aware of the packed room and the potential backlash, regardless of the complete lack of evidence linking evolutionary theory to moral decay. This is the appeal to fear fallacy, when arguments bypass reason by exploiting fears rather than providing legitimate evidence. This fallacy works by short-circuiting critical thinking through emotional manipulation. Instead of supporting a position with relevant facts or logical reasoning, it presents frightening consequences of rejecting the claim. It follows the formula: if you don't accept X, something terrible will happen, making fear, not truth, the primary motivator for acceptance. The appeal to fear saturates modern life. Advertisers frighten consumers about social rejection to sell deodorant, or about potential intruders to sell security systems. Politicians warn that opponents will destroy the economy, undermine national security, or erode fundamental rights. Religious messages sometimes emphasize eternal punishment rather than theological truths. Each instance replaces reasoned argument with threat. What makes this fallacy so powerful is that fear triggers our fight or flight response, activating brain regions that process immediate threats rather than those responsible for nuanced analysis. When afraid, we instinctively seek safety rather than accuracy. From an evolutionary perspective, false positives, perceiving danger where none exists, were less costly than false negatives, missing actual threats, making us naturally susceptible to fear-based appeals. The fallacy becomes particularly dangerous in public discourse about complex issues. Climate change discussions feature competing fear appeals: environmental catastrophe versus economic collapse. Immigration debates center on fears of job loss versus humanitarian crises. Healthcare policies are framed around fears of government control versus medical bankruptcy. In each case, legitimate discussion of evidence gets overshadowed by emotional manipulation. Fear is a powerful motivator, but a poor guide to truth. When someone tells you what to be afraid of, rather than what to think about. They're likely trying to bypass your critical faculties rather than engage them. Special pleading fallacy. The office manager calls an emergency meeting about persistent tardiness. Starting immediately, anyone arriving after 9 a.m. will have it documented in their performance review, she announces sternly. Punctuality is non-negotiable in a professional environment. The staff nods glumly. The very next morning, the manager strolls in at 9:22 a.m., casually waving at everyone already working. When the assistant manager gently mentions the new policy, she responds with genuine surprise. "Oh, that doesn't apply to me. I have morning childcare responsibilities. And besides, I'm handling strategic work that doesn't depend on rigid schedules. My situation is completely different." By the following week, she's written up 3 employees for tardiness, including a single parent who arrived 4 minutes late after dropping off a sick child at daycare. Apparently, their childcare responsibilities don't constitute a special circumstance. This is special pleading, the fallacy of applying standards to others while claiming unjustified exemptions for yourself or those you favor. This fallacy occurs when someone introduces ad hoc exceptions to their own rules. When those rules become inconvenient for them personally, it follows the pattern. Everyone must follow this principle, except me, because my case is special, without adequate justification for why it's special. It's essentially selective application of principles based on self-interest rather than relevant differences. Special pleading appears constantly in daily life. Parents enforce strict screen time limits for children while spending hours on their own devices. Politicians condemn unethical behavior in opponents while excusing identical actions from allies. Religious leaders preach sacrifice while living luxuriously. Each instance involves creating double standards that conveniently benefit the rulemaker. What makes this fallacy so insidious is that sometimes exceptions are legitimately warranted. Different circumstances can justify different treatment. The error lies in claiming exemptions without providing genuinely relevant distinctions that would justify the different application of rules. The fallacy reveals our remarkable capacity for self-justification. Humans excel at finding reasons why our case is unique, while others' situations are standard. We perceive complexities and mitigating factors in our own circumstances, while seeing others' situations as straightforward. This asymmetry in perspective makes special pleading feel justified from the inside while appearing hypocritical from the outside. Affirming the consequent fallacy. The detective stares at the crime scene, nodding confidently. "The killer must be the gardener," he announces to his puzzled partner. "Think about it. If the gardener is guilty, there would be soil near the window where the intruder entered. And look, there's soil by the window. Case closed." His partner frowns. "But wait, couldn't someone else have tracked in dirt? The homeowner is an avid hiker. The victim's brother works construction. Even the mail carrier could have left soil from other deliveries." The detective waves these objections away. "You're overcomplicating things. I established that if the gardener did it, we'd find soil. We found soil. Therefore, the gardener did it. That's just logic. This is affirming the consequent, a formal logical fallacy where someone reasons backwards from a result to a specific cause, ignoring other possible explanations. The fallacy follows this invalid pattern. If P, then QQ is true. Therefore, P must be true. It mistakenly assumes that because a certain condition would lead to a particular result, observing that result proves the condition. It fails to recognize that multiple causes can produce the same effect. This reasoning error appears everywhere once you start looking. If someone has the flu, they'll have a fever. You have a fever, so you must have the flu. If it rained, the sidewalk would be wet. The sidewalk is wet, so it must have rained. If she loved me, she would remember my birthday. She remembered my birthday, so she must love me. Each example ignores alternative explanations for the observed outcome. Many illnesses cause fevers. Sprinklers can wet sidewalks. Politeness might motivate birthday wishes. What makes this fallacy so compelling is that it resembles valid deductive reasoning while subtly inverting it. The valid form, if P, then QP, is true. Therefore, Q is true, feels so similar that our brains often fail to distinguish between these patterns. The fallacy becomes particularly problematic in scientific thinking, where correlation frequently gets misinterpreted as causation. If this medication works, symptoms improve. The patient's symptoms improved, so the medication works, ignoring the possibility of placebo effects, natural recovery, or other treatments. Criminal investigations are especially vulnerable to this error. If Smith committed the crime, his fingerprints would be at the scene. His fingerprints were found, so Smith must be guilty, disregarding innocent explanations for the evidence. This backwards reasoning has contributed to numerous wrongful convictions throughout history. Appeal to pity fallacy. The professor opens her email to find a lengthy message from a student who received a D on the final paper. "I'm devastated by this grade," it begins. "I really need at least a B in this class to maintain my scholarship. Without it, I'll have to drop out of college entirely. My single mother has been working 2 jobs to help with my expenses, and she'll be crushed if I have to leave school. I've been dealing with anxiety all semester, plus my dog died during finals week. I'm the first person in my family to attend college, and this grade might end that dream forever. Please find it in your heart to reconsider." Notably absent from the lengthy appeal is any discussion of the paper's actual quality or specific reasons why the assessment might be incorrect. This is the appeal to pity fallacy, attempting to win an argument or gain compliance by exploiting sympathy rather than providing relevant evidence or reasoning, also known as argumentum ad misericordiam. This fallacy tries to overwhelm logical evaluation with emotional distress. Instead of addressing the actual merits of a position, it diverts attention to suffering, hardship, or unfortunate circumstances. It effectively says, "Feel sorry for me, therefore conclude in my favor," regardless of whether the pity is relevant to the matter at hand. The fallacy appears in numerous contexts. Students request grade changes based on personal difficulties rather than academic performance. Job candidates emphasize personal hardships instead of qualifications. Defendants in court highlight their family responsibilities rather than addressing evidence. Each instance attempts to replace relevant criteria with sympathetic circumstances. What makes this fallacy so effective is that human compassion is generally a positive trait. We're naturally inclined to alleviate suffering and help those in distress. The appeal to pity exploits this admirable tendency, weaponizing our empathy to bypass critical thinking. It creates emotional pressure that makes declining requests feel cruel, even when the request itself is unreasonable. Importantly, not all appeals involving hardship are fallacious. Sometimes suffering is directly relevant to the matter at hand. An employee requesting time off due to illness is providing relevant information, not committing a fallacy. A student asking for an assignment extension due to a family emergency may have a legitimate reason that merits consideration. The error occurs when hardship is presented as a reason to disregard applicable standards or evidence. Loaded question fallacy. The department meeting grows uncomfortably silent as the VP points at a young employee. When exactly did you decide that company policies don't apply to you? The employee stammers, I don't think that at all. The VP presses harder. So you're claiming you accidentally shared confidential information with competitors? The flustered employee tries to explain there was no leak, but the VP interrupts. Just answer the question. Was it negligence or deliberate sabotage? Colleagues shift awkwardly in their seats, already perceiving guilt despite no evidence being presented. The accusation was debated. It was embedded within questions that made innocence grammatically impossible to assert. This is the loaded question fallacy, the devious practice of embedding unproven assumptions within questions in ways that make them difficult to answer without implicitly accepting those assumptions. A loaded question works like a linguistic trap, similar to the classic, "Have you stopped beating your spouse?" Whether you answer yes or no, you've tacitly admitted to spouse beating. The question's structure makes it nearly impossible to challenge its premise directly. Political interviews feature this fallacy constantly. Why do you support policies that hurt working families? Assumes policies are harmful without establishing that fact. Customer surveys ask, how satisfied were you with our excellent service? Presupposing excellence. Managers inquire, why is your productivity falling? When decreased productivity hasn't been established. What makes loaded questions so effective is that normal conversational flow creates pressure to answer questions directly. Challenging the question itself seems evasive or confrontational. Most people instinctively try to answer rather than step back and examine the question's validity, especially in high-pressure situations. The fallacy becomes particularly manipulative in interrogations and cross-examinations. Where did you hide the evidence? Presupposes evidence exists and the subject hid it. When did you first realize your approach was failing? Assumes failure as established fact. Each formulation makes recipients defend themselves against claims that were never openly made or proven. The loaded question creates a heads-I win, tails-you lose scenario. Direct answers implicitly accept embedded assumptions, while refusal to answer appears suspicious. It's like being asked, is this the first time you've been caught cheating, or have there been other instances? Either response incriminates. Media coverage often features this fallacy through headlines framed as questions. Is candidate X hiding financial ties to foreign interests? Such formulations plant suspicion without requiring evidence, leaving even direct denials tainted by the lingering impression created by the question itself. Base rate fallacy. The hospital administrator reviews the new cancer screening program with growing concern. This test is 95% accurate at detecting cancer when it's present, and only gives false positives 5% of the time. We should implement it immediately for all patients. The hospital statistician winces. Actually, that would be a terrible idea. The cancer we're testing for occurs in only 1 in 1,000 people. If we test 10,000 people, about 10 actually have cancer, and the test will correctly identify about 9 of them. But of the 9,990 cancer-free people, 5% will test positive. That's nearly 500 false positives. This means if someone tests positive, there's less than a 2% chance they actually have cancer. We'd cause widespread panic for almost no benefit. The administrator stares blankly, struggling to understand how a 95% accurate test could be so misleading. This is the base rate fallacy, the error of focusing on specific case information while ignoring relevant background statistical frequencies. This cognitive error occurs when people emphasize individuating information, like test accuracy, while neglecting the underlying probability of what they're testing for, the base rate. it leads to dramatic misinterpretations of what probabilities actually mean in real-world scenarios. The fallacy permeates medical decision-making. Patients hear they tested positive on a 99% accurate screening and assume they almost certainly have the condition, without considering how rare the condition might be in the population. Doctors sometimes order tests without calculating whether the results will be meaningfully interpretive, given the condition's prevalence. Law enforcement and security systems suffer similarly. Airport facial recognition systems that are 99.9% accurate seem impressive until you realize that among millions of travelers, thousands will be falsely flagged. Profiling programs that correctly identify 90% of criminals may sound effective, but if the targeted behavior is extremely rare, most identified individuals will be innocent. What makes this fallacy so persistent is that humans are naturally drawn to vivid, specific information rather than abstract statistical backgrounds. The concrete fact that this test is 95% accurate feels more relevant and immediate than the abstract knowledge that this condition affects 0.1% of people. Our brains evolved to prioritize specific, recent information over general background knowledge. The base rate fallacy becomes particularly problematic in risk assessment. People dramatically overestimate risks that receive media attention, terrorist attacks, shark attacks, while underestimating common dangers, heart disease, car accidents, because they neglect base rates in favor of memorable examples. Appeal to novelty fallacy. The marketing team sits mesmerized as the consultant unveils his proposal. Your entire customer service system needs to be replaced, he declares confidently. Your current process has been in place for 5 years, practically prehistoric in today's fast-moving business environment. Our new AI-driven engagement platform represents the cutting edge of customer interaction technology. When the operations director mentions their current system has a 95% satisfaction rating and was custom built for their specific industry, the consultant dismisses this with a wave. That may have been excellent in 2020, but it's 2025. Nobody succeeds with last decade's solutions. The most innovative companies are all switching to systems like ours. Do you want to be left behind using outdated technology while your competitors embrace the future? This is the appeal to novelty fallacy, the error of assuming something is superior simply because it's newer, more recent, or more innovative. Also called argumentum ad novitatem, this fallacy reverses the appeal to tradition by automatically equating newness with improvement. It follows the flawed reasoning. X is newer than Y, therefore X is better than Y. It substitutes recency for actual evidence of superiority. The fallacy thrives in technology markets, where latest and greatest becomes a stand-in for genuine advancement. Consumers replace perfectly functional devices because newer models exist, regardless of whether the upgrades offer meaningful benefits. Companies abandon effective systems merely because they're outdated, sometimes implementing inferior solutions that happen to be newer. Education systems are particularly vulnerable, as administrations chase trendy methodologies while discarding proven approaches merely because they seem old-fashioned. Management consultants regularly persuade organizations to adopt novel frameworks, not because they've demonstrated better results, but because they represent current thinking. What makes this fallacy so persuasive is that novelty often does correlate with improvement in many domains. Human progress depends on innovation and refinement. The error comes in assuming that correlation is universal, that newer automatically means better in every instance. without evaluating actual performance. The appeal to novelty exploits our psychological attraction to the fresh and exciting. Novel experiences trigger dopamine release in our brains, creating positive associations independent of objective quality. Marketers weaponize this tendency by emphasizing newness itself as a virtue, knowing we're predisposed to value it. The fallacy becomes particularly costly when it drives unnecessary replacements of functional systems merely to keep up with perceived trends. Organizations spend millions implementing new technologies, not because they solve problems, but because they fear appearing outdated by keeping what works. Argument from ignorance fallacy. The conference room falls silent as the pharmaceutical company's CEO makes his case. We've conducted 15 studies on our supplement's side effects. Not a single one found evidence of liver damage. This conclusively proves our product is safe for the liver. When a researcher tentatively points out that none of these studies specifically monitored liver function or continued longer than 2 weeks, the CEO dismisses this concern. The absence of negative findings speaks for itself. If our supplement caused problems, someone would have discovered evidence by now. No evidence of harm means evidence of no harm. Science has had every opportunity to find problems and hasn't. That's all the proof we need. This is the argument from ignorance fallacy, the error of claiming something must be true because it hasn't been proven false, or vice versa. Also called appeal to ignorance, or argumentum ad ignorantium. This fallacy mistakes absence of evidence for evidence of absence. It follows the flawed reasoning. X has not been proven false, therefore X must be true. Or Y has not been proven true, therefore Y must be false. It transforms a lack of knowledge into a form of knowledge. The fallacy appears in countless contexts. UFO enthusiasts declare, scientists can't explain all UFO sightings, so some must be alien spacecraft. Skeptics counter, there's no definitive proof of extraterrestrial visitors, so they must not exist. Both positions commit the same error, converting absence of evidence into a definitive conclusion. Religious debates feature this fallacy regularly. You can't prove God doesn't exist, therefore God exists, versus you can't prove God exists, therefore God doesn't exist. Neither argument is logically sound. Both attempt to build conclusions on missing information. What makes this fallacy so appealing is that in everyday reasoning, absence of evidence sometimes is suggestive. If you search your entire house for your keys without finding them, it's reasonable to conclude they're not there. The error comes in applying this heuristic to domains where evidence might be difficult to obtain or where we haven't looked thoroughly enough. The argument from ignorance becomes particularly problematic in scientific contexts, where it can halt inquiry prematurely. We haven't found evidence of harm from this chemical, so it must be safe, might simply mean we haven't conducted the right studies yet. Scientific progress often comes precisely from investigating gaps in our knowledge, not declaring them filled by default. Denying the antecedent fallacy. The high school debate tournament reaches its climax as 2 finalists argue about education policy. If someone graduates from college, they will earn higher wages, argues the first student. Therefore, people who don't go to college won't earn high wages. The opponent tries to object, pointing out that many successful entrepreneurs, tradespeople, and tech workers earn substantial incomes without college degrees. The first debater dismisses these as rare exceptions, rather than recognizing the fundamental flaw in her reasoning. She's committed a classic logical error by assuming that if one path leads to a destination, no other paths can reach the same endpoint. This is denying the antecedent, a formal logical fallacy that occurs when someone incorrectly reasons backwards from a conditional statement. The fallacy follows this invalid pattern. If P, then Q, not P. Therefore, not Q. In formal terms, it attempts to negate the antecedent, the if part, and then incorrectly concludes that the consequent, the then part, must also be negated. This reasoning fails because while P may be sufficient to cause Q, it isn't necessarily the only cause of Q. This error appears in many disguises. If you exercise regularly, you'll be healthy. You don't exercise regularly, so you must not be healthy. If it's raining, the streets are wet. It's not raining, so the streets must be dry. If you study medicine, you become a doctor. You didn't study medicine, so you're not a doctor. Each conclusion improperly assumes there's only one path to the result. What makes this fallacy so deceptive is that it resembles valid logical forms. Its mirror image. If P, then QP is true. Therefore Q is true, is perfectly valid. Modus ponens. Similarly, if P, then QQ is false. Therefore P is false, is also valid. Modus tollens. Our brains easily confuse these patterns, making the invalid form seem reasonable. The fallacy creates particular problems in policy discussions. If we implement policy X, we'll reduce problem Y. We didn't implement policy X, therefore problem Y wasn't reduced, ignoring that other approaches might have addressed the issue. It appears in personal development. If you follow this specific program, you'll succeed. You didn't follow the program, so your success is impossible. Each instance artificially limits the paths to a particular outcome. Denying the antecedent subtly reinforces black and white thinking by suggesting there's only one route to any destination. It closes our minds to alternative pathways and creative solutions by locking us into a single causal relationship. Conjunction fallacy. The investment committee listens intently as the financial advisor presents two potential scenarios for the upcoming quarter. Scenario A. The market will decline, he explains. Scenario B. The market will decline due to rising interest rates, inflation concerns, and supply chain disruptions. He then polls the room. Which scenario do you think is more likely to occur? Surprisingly, 11 of the 15 committee members select scenario B. The advisor smiles, revealing this was actually a cognitive test. You've just demonstrated the conjunction fallacy. Logically, scenario A must be more probable than scenario B. Why? Because scenario B can only happen if scenario A happens first, plus additional specific conditions must also occur. Yet the detailed story in B feels more plausible than the general statement in A, even though mathematically it cannot be more probable. This is the conjunction fallacy, the error of believing that specific conditions are more likely than general ones, defying the fundamental laws of probability. This cognitive bias occurs when we judge a conjunction of multiple events, A and B and C, as more probable than a single constituent event alone. It violates the basic principle that a subset cannot be larger than the set containing it. PA and B cannot exceed PA or PB. The classic demonstration is the Linda problem from behavioral economics. Participants read about Linda, described as a bright, outspoken woman concerned with discrimination and social justice. When asked whether Linda is a bank teller or Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement is more likely, most choose the latter. A mathematical impossibility, since all feminist bank tellers are necessarily included in the larger set of all bank tellers. What makes this fallacy so persistent is that detailed scenarios activate our pattern recognition systems and narrative thinking. Specific details create coherent stories that feel more representative of situations we can imagine. The richer description seems to match our mental patterns better, creating an illusion of higher probability despite mathematical impossibility. The fallacy appears in risk assessment constantly. People judge terrorism caused by religious extremists as more likely than terrorism in general. Investors consider market crash due to banking crisis more probable than simply market crash. Each specific scenario feels more plausible precisely because the details create a vivid, recognizable pattern, even though each additional detail mathematically reduces the probability. The conjunction fallacy has serious real-world implications. Security resources get misallocated to highly specific threats while neglecting broader categories. Investors prepare for particular crisis scenarios while remaining vulnerable to unexpected ones. Policymakers address narrow, detailed problems at the expense of their more general causes. Ambiance fallacy. The mayor stands at the podium, responding to criticism about the city's handling of homelessness. "I promise to eliminate all homeless people from downtown by December." The headline in next morning's newspaper reads, "Mayor pledges to eliminate all homeless people," causing immediate public outrage. The mayor's office issues a frantic clarification that he meant removing homelessness as a condition, not homeless individuals as people. The damage control takes weeks, all because a syntactically ambiguous statement allowed for two dramatically different interpretations, one humanitarian and one seemingly genocidal. This is ambiance, the fallacy that occurs when ambiguous grammar or sentence structure creates multiple possible interpretations, leading to confusion or misrepresentation. Unlike most fallacies that involve faulty reasoning, ambiance stems from linguistic imprecision. It happens when sentence structure allows multiple interpretations, each potentially leading to different conclusions. The ambiguity isn't in the words themselves, but in how they're arranged. Ambiance appears everywhere once you start looking. Restaurant signs proclaim, "Fresh fish sold here daily," as opposed to stale fish sold elsewhere occasionally. Classified ads offer antique desks suitable for lady with thick legs and large drawers. Warning labels advise, "Do not use while sleeping." Use what? The product or sleep? Each example contains grammatical structure that permits multiple readings. Legal documents are breeding grounds for this fallacy. Contracts with phrases like, "The tenant shall keep no pets that disturb other residents," leave unclear whether all pets are forbidden or only disruptive ones. Insurance policies state, "We will cover all accidents reported within 24 hours, without specifying whether the reporting or the accidents must occur within that time frame. What makes ambiance so troublesome is that both writer and reader often remain unaware of the ambiguity. The writer knows what they meant and doesn't notice the alternative interpretation. The reader assumes their understanding is the only possible one. Each believes communication has succeeded while actually reaching different conclusions. The fallacy becomes particularly problematic in important contexts like legislation, international agreements, or medical instructions where precision is essential. Laws with ambiguous phrasing can lead to years of litigation. Diplomatic statements with structural ambiguities can exacerbate international tensions. Medication instructions with unclear syntax can result in dangerous dosing errors. When faced with seemingly outrageous or absurd statements, consider whether you might be witnessing ambiance rather than malice or stupidity. The meaning might be trapped in grammatical quicksand.